I want to start with two different things. First of all, is two movies that you might want to be aware of. Jeffrey Robinson has a movie on Netflix that is just incredible, really just right in line with what we're doing. It's called Who We Are, a Chronicle of Racism in America. So if you have Netflix, watch for that, Who We Are. Marvelous film. That's also, he's kind of expanded that into, there's a webpage that's about the Who We Are project, trying to continue to that discussion, because it's a great discussion he's trying to have. And it's across things, across lots of lines that he's trying to go. Second one, I just saw that this movie this week. It's a little 45-minute short by Agnès Varda. She's a French filmmaker, has just died a couple of years ago, has done marvelous work, and it's on the Black Panthers. So,
yes.
So if you'd like to watch that, you can get it, I know, on YouTube.
Would you repeat her name again?
Agnès Varda, V-A-R. Yep. So that one's really easy to find. The Who We Are is easy to find too if you have Netflix. It's a Netflix movie, so it's not anywhere else. Okay. So second thing is a deeper topic. We're today, this chapter is dealing with a whole lot of very deep, sensitive, rough issues. And so please let us know if we get into it. And I want us to be very blunt and open about it, but I also don't want to trigger anyone. And so if we're getting into those spaces, let us know as we struggle through it, because it is dealing with some horrible spaces. Okay, so will you be honest and help me with that? All right. Starts off by talking about two laws passed in the late 1600s about that then forms the bridge work between all the different stories he tells. Two laws that were passed by the House of Burgesses that formulated relationship between white and black in that state, and because of its place in history in the whole of America. The first one in 1662 is that all children born in this country shall be held bound or free only according to the condition of the mother. And the second in 1682 that makes interracial marriage punishable by imprisonment. And then he goes through and says, from those two laws, we chose to essentially enslave and codify our enslavement of human beings. So the basic question I want to ask you is, as you read through this chapter, where did you feel the guilt? Where did you feel the pain? Where did you feel the anger about what we did collectively, not us, but our nation did collectively during those years? And what passed and continued forward. So I'd love to hear stories of how it is that you continue to see some of the after effects, even as we move past the freeing of everyone, even as we move past the equal rights of everyone, and how it continues. So how did it hit you? Yes, Barbara.
I had the same visceral feeling as I did when the Dobbs decision came down. The whole body autonomy stripped away, the susceptibility to rape, the whole thing just ran right through me. And I could imagine what those people felt like, how they were used and abused and desperate, absolutely desperate.
Terrible. And you know what ran through my mind the whole time? One little phrase: Christian nation.
Say that again.
Christian nation, just those two words. And that we like to call ourselves that, and yet hear all this very non part of the set of beliefs, and we set it up that way, but still believe ourselves to be Christian nation. through all that.
This is kind of a long share.
You go ahead.
Okay, so MSNBC had several, way back, they had a show called Civil War. And they just reran it, so I rewatched it,
I have a copy of it in case you want.
new eyes. And, the only thing I had heard was, you know, white people got kind of discouraged with Reconstruction and kind of let it go, but no. They glommed on in a way, it was more, it went overt in the north, west, and Midwest, wherever else versus the south. You know, we didn't have colored white mountains and all that stuff.
Right.
But we were just as prejudiced.
We were.
And that's the fact that now hits me.
Yeah.
And, I'm, excuse my expression, I'm as mad as hell, I don't want to take it anymore. And, I have done one step yesterday. I've been taking these classes at, FEMA Council on Aging, and I fill out this form. And this question has been getting to me for a while, where they ask, you
Ethnicity.
to fill out,
Mhm.
are you Pacific Islander, Black, whatever, Caucasian? And I wrote down, this question offends me, I am not filling it out.
Good.
I fill it out, I'm human.
And thank you for sharing that. It's a struggle, isn't it, to try to figure out what to do and to try to fit into the fact. And that's why we very easily go to I'm from the north, of course I'm good. Because I'm not from. And sometimes the worst people in moving any kind of civil rights things forward are the ones who think that they've already got it solved. And so never aren't dealing with it any longer. So thank you for being aware of that.
And another interesting fact, and my first husband had relatives in the South, but people like to go to the South plantations and see what it was like. And in this MSNBC on the Civil War, then, you know, a black fellow in the class, a young man, and he said, at plantation days, he said, oh, they're fun. You know, like Williamsburg, they dress up in the style they used to and show all these things. And, you know, he enjoyed it. Of course, they have all the music and the food, but they don't have downside.
Yeah. You're not waking up at 5 in the morning and having to work all day long.
Living under a floor.
Yeah.
I wanted to tag on to what you said because I also object to being asked my ethnicity. I really wonder why we continue to do this, but I'll add a story to yours. My grandchildren are biracial. My granddaughter was born in Chicago and her birth certificate says she's Black. My grandson was born in Pennsylvania and the nurse put down on his birth certificate that he's white without consulting the parents. You wonder about, you know, nurses. First of all, nurses are making this decision without talking to the parents.
That's how arbitrary it is.
Yeah, that shows how arbitrary it is.
Yeah.
But even more so, why is that even necessary on a birth certificate?
I mean, she made a good case why it was necessary. And if you want to keep buying into those reasons and that framework, then it is necessary. But for most of us, why?
I think as we look forward to how we are going to redress the evils that were perpetrated in the name of our country, we're going to have to structure a feasible, practical, and ultimately acceptable to the rank and file of America's manner of making this right. And that means targeting a remedy to that group of people who were victimized. To target that remedy
The document.
we're gonna have to determine
Mhm.
whether you are one of those people who was victimized.
Yeah,
I mean, I certainly am not ready to fall back on, well, we're all victims, you know,
yeah, yeah.
because we're not. And
No, and not to the same degree. If post all of that, or even just post 1964, right? We can sit in a space of relative privilege rather than in having to struggle with what the ramifications are.
our problem is going to be very shortly, and I think the United States Supreme Court is going to say, well, the way to deal with, you know, eliminating racial preferences or racial discrimination is to eliminate all racial preferences. No affirmative action.
Yeah. I
And
think that's a very real possibility with the
Yeah.
Supreme Court.
at that point, once again, the available mechanisms for making redress for this national wrong becomes severely limited.
Yeah, and it's so difficult because we can look and estimate the wealth of Tulsa, Oklahoma Black community pre-1920s, right? We can see what happened after, but how do you measure from what it was to today and what it might have been? How do you do that? And that's one of the easier cases in a lot of ways.
Sorry, I keep talking, I've got to give other people a chance, but I was wondering, how many of you saw the news this week that there was a Black family that in California, their ancestors, the beachfront property was condemned and taken by the city. Well, they got it back. It was given, they took it to court and it was given back to them, and it was seen as a reparation. But now there are a lot of people who are angry with that family because the family sold the beach property back to the city of Santa Monica, I think it was, for $20 million. And there are some people who don't feel that was the right thing for that family to do.
What did,
It-
what should they have done? I mean, do they
But
have?
they didn't, they thought they should kept the land.
Yeah, they thought they should have kept the land, and it was a beach resort for Blacks, and they thought they should have kept the history.
You know, the hard part is, no matter what choice you make, it will not sit.
No, it's not.
It will not sit well across the spectrum. Right.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure. You were- Okay, I want to say one thing first about reparations. Then you have to consider the indigenous communities.
It is.
It's not like we have a destroy, I mean, when I read about our indigenous history, I mean, I read the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. And honestly and truly, at the time I owned my home, and I was ready to just say, it's yours. I mean, you feel so guilty about that. The other thing I want to bring up is talking about the whole relationships between Black and whites. In 1971, I was a senior in college, and I lived in a house with 4 other women who were all Black. And my parents had a little bit of problem with that until I got to know them. And then it's like they were like, these women are wonderful. I'm like, oh. But
Isn't that amazing? They're
But
black
one-
and they were women.
and one of my very good friends is a Black man, and we would go out. We would go out and have meals together and stuff. This was Lexington, Kentucky, the University of Kentucky. 1970. It was, oh my God. We just decided we couldn't really keep doing it after a while. I mean, we thought about dating, and it was just after a while, it's like, you were so harassed. I was called a white whore. He was, I mean, I already trained, but he was calm. And I mean,
people were just outright felt like they had the right to comment on that.
Right.
You know, and it was, and my dad told me, he's like, if you date a black man, I'm gonna go jump off a bridge.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if that's all your life is worth, you go jump. And he didn't like kids much either, but
He didn't
Yeah.
jump.
no. He didn't jump. I knew he wouldn't. He was just, it was like, you know, but it's like, how else are you gonna control your daughter when you say, you know, it's like, you're gonna jump off a bridge. But it was, you know, the seventies, and it's like, it just was so, I mean, the harassment. I mean, it was hate, it was just pure unadulterated
Yeah.
hate.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, both of us.
It's amazing how long that lingered in America.
It's still here.
It's still here. Very much so.
They're re-showing Eye on the Prize, and I may actually cry, this was so disturbing to me. 1971 Attica. And for any of you who were living back east, it was, if you see these films where there are hundreds of guys again, all black, who are naked again in the courtyard.
Yeah.
It's raining, it's muddy, they need to get on their stomachs and crawl out while they're being shot. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I feel like people need to see this, but it is so, it's so dehumanizing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, and that's where we were at.
They probably did that
That's where
because
it's
there was just a new movie made about Addie. Within the last 3 years or so.
We're still doing that to black men. Look at what they just did to Perry Jones. I mean, we're still doing that.
Mhm.
Here's, in a little bit, I want to get to gender issues. Because we treat men and women, black men and black women very differently through our ages. And I think it's important for us to deal with that. But let me finish this.
Yeah.
First, go ahead.
Oh, well, just 10 years later, 81, I was dating a black man, and I never ran into anything that I felt like was stares or pointing or
Where was this out?
Texas.
It's amazing.
You can't do
Houston.
that.
I can add to that, though. My son-in-law was driving early in the morning to the airport so he could deploy to Afghanistan. My daughter was going along with him because she was going to drive the car back home after he got on the plane. And, you know, young people nowadays, she's wearing flannel pajama pants and a t-shirt. He was in the passenger seat of the car. They were stopped by a Colorado state policeman, and he made my son-in-law get out of the car and get into the back of the police car where they keep the suspects. And, you know, locked him in. And then he went up and interrogated my daughter to make sure that my son-in-law was not kidnapping.
So. Black men in America most often face a suspicion about them. They are incarcerated more. They are in traffic stops. They are injured and killed more often. We still are master-slave relationships in many ways there. I have to control you. And he didn't deal with this much, but there it is. What do we do with that in America? That's still, if you talk to any black person that I've ever met, they will tell you that they have faced some kind of situation that was beyond what any of us will face. It's just a normal thing.
Every morning, when they get up and go out, it's a different world for them than it is for us.
Yeah.
Because people are gonna look at them, is this guy dangerous?
Is this guy dangerous?
And I've got to be careful because he's black.
Yeah.
So there's another show on PBS, that's the origins of hip hop. And I feel like I need to understand hip hop better. And I have a feeling most of us here may have some challenges with hip hop.
Yeah.
But it is the music of oppression, and I finally get it. I get the music and why it has become so relevant worldwide. And in terms of the women in hip hop, have a real problem with the sexualization. But what I realized is, given the history, that pretty much any person who came from a slave person, chances are they got here by being raped. That their family.
By being what?
It's a family of rape. And with this article, it's like women trying to take back, Black women in particular,
Yeah.
with how sexual they are, and it's like, F you, I am in control of my body.
Yeah.
You can want me all you
Yeah.
want, honey, but you ain't gonna get it.
That's right.
And it's a really interesting dynamic, because then you get into the power dynamics. And the difference between trying to have equal rights, which gives us the right to equal power, or if it goes beyond that, to our notions of what power is.
Yeah.
And that gets into patriarchy.
Yeah. Which is where I want to spend most of our time, not patriarchy, but on how it is that Black women specifically are treated in America, how they've been treated. Because both of these laws that were passed were more directed towards the women and their role in all this than to the men.
How do you mean?
In that it was much more of a controlling of how do we make sure that the offspring come a certain way, and what they can and cannot do. Okay, it was about, excuse me, it was about keeping people enslaved, and the way to enslave Black people, I believe, was enslave Black women, and enslave what happens to and with Black women. And if I go back to my earlier comment about seeing, what's Christian about this. How is it that we can in any way hold as wonderful in our past something that says, let me enslave Black women so that I can rape them, and from their offspring enlarge so from my lust, I enlarge my wealth. And yet these were good Christian men who were doing this, a Christian nation that was perpetuating that evil in the world.
Was Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson, and most of our founding fathers,
Yeah.
at least many of them, right? Why is it, first of all, that we feel like our job is to control? Because that's what much of it came down to, right? Why is it that we think we should or must own and control another human being?
Because we can't control ourselves.
Maybe.
And Black women today are dying much more in childbirth than white women. Much. You're much more likely to die in childbirth if you're Black.
Sure. And the residuals are much.
Prenatal care.
Regardless of income.
Right.
Regardless of income.
Income doesn't mean that there's that's still a very big.
Yes.
Shocking.
Yeah, really.
Believe it's the inevitable consequence of capitalism. Reducing human beings to a production input,
Yeah.
how
How can I use this?
you're, and you're handy because unlike land, you can reproduce.
Yeah.
We can make more of you.
Yeah.
And,
And if I can get you to this price and not this price,
that is, if I can steal your labor.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm doing,
Do what?
working you without paying you,
Okay.
then I can accumulate more capital. And with more capital, I can buy more machines and do away with the expense of you ultimately.
yeah.
I don't even have to feed you anymore.
Yeah. It was interesting how they contrasted the beginning of, and so it was kids taken off the street of Dublin or, you know, whatever, and brought over here, maybe coerced to come over here, but at least given something for their work after they were done with their term of servitude. So it was forced labor. It wasn't a good thing for us to acknowledge, but it was better than what followed, right? And so we went from bad to even worse. Look, this is cheaper and this is a perpetuating thing rather than,
But we do it today. We just do it at a distance.
Yeah.
We've exported our slavery to China,
yeah.
and we all just enjoy the cheap goods
That's right.
and don't think about what's happening in those factory towns.
Yeah.
And
Or through mass incarceration.
Which we'll get to a lot on that in the chapter on punishment, and which is a big conclusion of the 13.
Yeah,
If you have not watched the 13,
that's.
that's one of the big conclusions of that movie. And Ava does a good job with that, saying it looks like all we're doing is putting slavery into prison.
So.
well, at least we've done away with peonage.
Yeah, maybe.
You know, I mean, we're used to put them on the chain gang, lease them out to the,
They haven't been aware, that still exists in Texas and.
Angola.
The myth that was developed was that blacks and other people of color were not human. It was just the Europeans that were. That's the myth they really worked at, legalized, and spent a lot of time. People believed it, and that was their goal, and that's what happened. And so it's like who's living with 4 black women, and they found out they talking. God, they were people just like you and me. So if you can keep that distance, then you can continue that myth that they're not quite human, they're subjects.
Remember what time my mother said, like, my God, they're cleaner than you are. I was like. It's like,
See, but much of what happens is whatever we carry in our mind, you know, my sex talk with my mom lasted about this long. My talk with my mom about black-white relations and how you don't want to be in that, it was a much longer conversation, you know? Because she carried all of the prejudices of whatever she thought, the difficulty, the challenge, the wrongness might have been. Am I the only one that has that kind of space?
No,
Yeah, I grew up in, well, partly in St. Louis, but in Ohio, a lot of the time. But I noticed that back in Kansas, the prejudice was so much stronger. And my parents, especially my dad, still had some, I couldn't believe that he would use the word nigger, you know, I was just shocked at that because I never heard it in my school at all. You know, even, I don't know if I was in high school like that time or not, but anyway, I never heard it until my dad used it. And, yeah, so, yeah, this is, you know, we always with different levels of this, depending on where we come from.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a long time.
But I would guess that the reason why your dad used the word nigger is because it was just so prevalent that he didn't even think about it at all. And that's the hardest part. Whatever has become just the environment, the walls around us, that we stop thinking about.
I was gonna say, what gives me hope is, hey, your father used the word nigger, you were shocked by it.
I told him I was shocked.
I know my grandparents were prejudiced.
Mm-hmm.
My mother, she has some prejudices that she's not even aware of. I'm less prejudiced than the previous two generations. And there was no deliberate effort on the part of either my grandparents or my parents to have the next generation be less prejudiced. So I have hope. There is evolution going on.
It's a lot slower in Kansas.
Right.
And then together a lot of. Really, my brother mentioned that. Man, his prejudice just totally blew me out of the water and people up there. And so it's not just the South, it's more blatant than the South.
So I have a friend of mine who, down in Yuma, for the first 5 or 6 years that I was there, he would meet with me every Monday. He would just come in and talk to me. And we would spend an hour or two. His name's John. He was he was very successful at his work in Detroit. And because he carried a lot of prejudice with him, right? White Detroit versus black Detroit, and I think ultimately my answers to him drove him further and further to the Tea Party. Because he wasn't getting a religious satisfaction from his pastor that would reinforce that he could continue to hold on to those things. We like to hold on to those things which benefit us. I mean, I think on one side of my brain, the bad side of my brain, I understand why an employer wants to perpetuate his work, his staff by this means. But what it meant, right? What he was really doing, every one of those plantation owners that did that, terrible, just terrible. And then to be backed up by the by courts in so many cases, the majority of cases, was, I think, unconscionable. But that's why I think there's such a backlash today against like this book and about other books like it, is because the alternative is we have to face the fact that our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents did not face it.
We have to shift and change. No, we don't have to. But that's been going on around, is shifting and changing. And it may be a little bit scary. It's like my new coffee mug without a handle. So it's you see this change and man, I don't want to, so I'm gonna react to it. So my friend, I bumped into my friend John Chandler at the dump years ago. And so John and I got to talking and we connected some after that. And he played semi-professional baseball and he much preferred playing in the South because he knew where he stood compared with the North.
I've heard that before.
Consistent and so.
You might not have liked how they liked you, but at least you knew what it was gonna be like.
He had no question, he preferred it because he knew how he was gonna be treated. And so I was telling the story to my brother and he says, oh, he's an athlete, so he's black. So again, here's this other
just an assumption.
prejudice.
The Green Book, that movie deals with, with that.
Oh, yeah,
So that's a good movie to try to see.
that's a fabulous movie.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Jim, how much of this in our discussion is tied to fear, especially fear from white waspy men who are living or believe or have absorbed the there's only so much. There's only so much, whatever it is they aspire to.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of not abundance, of scarcity that drives much of our thinking. And so we struggle in how to deal with that. Right? My bottom line though is, I don't think most things are as scarce as what we think they are, but our practices around them have decided that they're scarce. And so
Exactly.
production of cotton, we think it's gonna run out someday. I better get a better workforce. I better get, you know, and we do whatever to perpetuate us, my holdings at somebody's expense. That's the answer.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the first thing I was recognizing was that the story in my family is that my parents moved here from Chicago for my dad's health. But that was at the end of the 40s. And I have a hunch that it was as much in response to the Black migration to the north, flooding Chicago and that area, that they moved away from that in response to that, because and I don't know whether that was even conscious, but I have a feeling that that was a piece of it. The other thing is the fear, and I am so aware that we're talking about reparation, which I think is absolutely necessary, and I don't have a clue how to go about it.
Right.
But we, you know, that's where we ought to be. But what legitimately all those formerly enslaved people, if they took revenge or reprisal, we have a great deal to fear.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think of the generosity of those people, not to have attacked long ago.
Yeah.
Long ago.
Yeah.
And as those numbers are shifting, those statistical things are shifting. Yeah, I think there's reason to fear. And
I
not
think
panic, but
that's right.
just be aware that we kind of deserve.
Yeah.
What would be the worst thing that could happen? I mean, truly, if we can easily become blinded by our own fears. We have been,
Yeah.
and consciously or unconsciously.
So
And
go ahead.
no, I'm asking you, Jim, what is the worst thing that could happen?
So one of the movies that I like to watch to remind myself what could happen is called Hotel Rwanda.
What is it? Oh, yes. Hotel
You have two tribes that there's no reason why one is the one in charge and one is not. It's just they've had whatever thing that was built up that said this one's in charge. And as soon as it was shifted, and was shifted very deliberately to put a disadvantage there, utter chaos broke out. And that's happened again and again. The way that the British pulled out of Sudan did the same type of thing in that country. And we've often done that to be able to say, you're not worthy of me helping you to do the best possible thing, right? You're not worthy of me even, you know, and I do the worst thing very often in these places. And so that's all power, right? Why is it that, okay, so I'm gonna read it. This was the single line that struck me the most. The very notion of rape didn't apply to Black women and girls because they were considered incapable of consenting or not consenting to sex. That's all a statement of power, right? It has nothing to do even with their experience of these women, because they knew these women had feelings, they had control, but in their mind, if they say they don't have, I have control over them, then it's a whole different ballgame. And we love control. So much of this may be based in fear, but it's about that I can, and so I'm going to.
And I think that's partly what's happening, what I see happening with a lot of Black women, where they are realizing their power. I personally think that Black women will save America. It's my own sort of fantasy. And there's a phrase of Black women magic. And it's about being able to make something out of nothing. And it gives me goosebumps, because that is really what they have done. What they've learned to do is make something out of hardly anything, which is magical. And still believe in God. I mean, that is the most magical.
Right. And still believe in America, still believe in,
Yes.
still believe in so much that I don't know how all of this doesn't drive it out of you, the want to, right? So one more movie. Called Black Girl. Black Girl, it was made in the 1970s. Ossie Davis, if you know Ossie Davis, famous actor, also one of the best Black directors in that time period. Try to show this movie of a mom and Medea, the grandmother, and three different daughters, two from one father, one from another father, and then I guess you could say a stepdaughter, as the mom realized that she was failing with her own daughters. She started adopting girls in the neighborhood and actually saw more potential in them because she'd seen the worst of her own daughters. And so Leslie Adams plays the daughter who's off in college, comes back, and her youngest sister, who already is looking at less than stellar choices in her life, affects that girl's choice to make, that girl's ability to see a different choice in front of her. Because what neighborhood is doing is saying there's only these choices. And I think that's the difficulty is that in many of the neighborhoods and many of the choices around them, we've said so many no's, we've defined so limited choices out in front that the easy choices are the wrong choices. In many neighborhoods, getting into a gang, being violent, getting into drugs are a way to be able to escape, but at what price? But that's what we've sometimes left people's choices to. And how do we then work in America differently so that we give other choices? And what the stepdaughter coming back did, and what I think Ossie Davis is trying to say here is, she said there is a different thing than all these things that are easily chosen. Let me be the one who supports you to be able to find that new choice. And at least that's what I hear. Part of this is how do we take away the barriers and be some kind of voice of a different space than that.
Well, I think it's happening, as little as it is happening. And I just came from my dentist's office, and my previous dentist retired, new dentist took over, and there was only one white person there. Everyone else was brown. And I had a great talk with the person who cleaned my teeth, who was a brown person who had multi-racial. And and we talked about race. So I think that's the hope, and that wouldn't have happened 50 years ago or 60 years ago. So here it is. This practice has changed from Amy Wurzel, who happened to be Jewish, basically all white, just because that's what it was, to here they're all brown except one person. The dentist is Vietnamese, I believe, or South Korean, I'm not sure which, but that's our hope, and that is changing. So yeah, I went to two credit unions. I dealt with a Black woman at each one of the credit unions last week.
So let me do an advertisement real quick. This morning I sat on one of the boards. I went to one of my board meetings that I sit on. And you should support this board. It's called Job Path. Anybody hear of Job Path? Okay, what Job Path is Job Path is is essentially what it says, helping people have a path towards a job. So it takes people that are earning at this level and literally by the end of the program, raises their salary, their annual salary, an average like $50,000, right? And what it does is it helps pay for and helps support a person who is trying to make different choices, make a decision to go differently, and gets them into education and supports them along the way, so that then they become positions like that, where they're able to do that, and it's getting them amazing results. Job Path is one of the most successful programs in Tucson right now about rejuvenating our job force, and the majority of the people are people of color that are taking advantage of this. And so if you want to send your money to somebody, to a group that's doing a good job, consider Job Path. Advertisement ended.
Well, isn't that largely pushed by Pima County Interfaith Council?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. The Pima County Interfaith kind of started that, and we have, about a third of the people on the board are from Pima County Interfaith, but also people from around the community, businesses around the community. So,
Community colleges and everything, a lot of organizations.
want more information about it, and you know.
But there was also a documentary I saw in the New York Times that was showing 1970.
Mhm.
And this I've said many times, it's like as an old hippie and stuff, it's like we're fighting the same shit now that we did then. It's still climate change, it's still race relations, it's still how we're poisoning the earth, it's still, a lot of this stuff that, yes, I have hope in some areas, but overall, I don't think we've moved very far. Sometimes I feel like, abortion, all these things I thought were hard for back then. Still where we.
Well, and I don't quite believe you. I think we've made a lot of strides.
Yeah.
But the reality is there's a lot of stuff that's being challenged right now, and we have to be the people who right now, not just we by ourselves, but we are the people who have to stand up and say something about these steps.
And we're gonna lose part of the time.
We're gonna lose part of the time, and it's gonna go backwards. But here's my thing. Is it even though it goes up and down, right, and back and forth, is it on a continually upward course? Or have we somehow turned a corner and it's on a downward course? And I think we're still on an upward course, but I put a course like this, it's more like this.
Yeah.
Right, it's upward, but it's a slow process. Right? And we have to be vigilant, and we have to keep working at it. Right?
So the Sutherland Baptist just got rid of a congregation because they had a woman pastor.
Yes.
Crazy, isn't it?
Biggest mega church in California.
Stupid, isn't it?
Rick Warren's congregation, I forget what they're called.
Saddleback.
Saddleback.
Yeah, Saddleback.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of things, but the story that struck me was the story of the two almost preteen girls. I think they were 12 and 14, right? Who were sterilized because they forced their mom to put an X on their thing. I don't think
They forced their mom to what?
they forced the mom to sign the consent form by putting an X on there. Not the girls, the medical personnel did that in order to sterilize them, right? We can never make reparations for that. How do you restore the fact that we've taken away that side of life, that possibility from those two girls? You can't. But we can change America and say we're not doing that anymore, and make sure that we work hard to make that happen. And with each thing, change that around.
I've forgotten her name, but there's a woman, Harriet or somebody.
Henrietta Love.
Yeah. A lot of the cancer research that's been done, it's been done from her stem cell.
Yeah.
From her cells.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, and the juxtaposition I'm hearing is, you know, a lot of the stuff in our chapter that was economic based.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, if we have job path, here again, it's economic based.
That's right.
So it's gotta tell you something.
And that's a bottom line for all this. Is it, are we supporting an economy that helps me? That is good for me? Or am I supporting an economy that helps other people as well? Doesn't necessarily have to leave me in a bad spot. I just have to make sure that it's not my wealth, your expense. And so far in America, we've done a whole lot of the latter.
I'm 72. And so I was around in 1970 in college, and I agree with you. Not a great deal has changed. I spent those intervening years as a lawyer working within the system. And I have come to the conclusion that when dealing with the two groups of our fellow citizens who have never been assimilated in the so-called melting pot, the indigenous Americans and Black Americans are distinguishable from everybody else because the one was here and we took everything they had by the edge of the sword, and the other we dragged here in chattel slavery. We're not going to change the legacy of that within the framework of our system of laws.
Mhm.
It's not going to happen, you know. Something very revolutionary is going to happen. It's going to happen if that is to change. And, you know, like Lennon said, what is to be done? Well, I think we've got to stop thinking about passing laws and modifying policies and all the things we do. When I was a prosecutor, you know, our answer, you know, the society's answer to every wrong behavior is, well, let's pass a law. Well, laws are made by middle-class white people for middle-class white people based on white middle-class people's values.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
We have to begin truly revolutionary thinking.
Yeah.
And thinking that is frankly very uncomfortable to undertake,
Right.
particularly when you've been a lawyer,
Right.
you know, but I'm convinced only such action and thinking is any hope of, because for the very reason you cite, you know,
Yeah.
Supreme Courts come, Supreme Courts go, the law goes this way, the law goes that way. You know,
So I wish we had more time to continue this, but I have to go over there and say a blessing. And then do that, actually service after that. But
Include us too.
we will include you. The difficulty, I think, is this, you're right, laws only go so far and they often go backwards. Bottom line is,
I don't,
I have to be able to look at that other person and see an equal and a not enslaved person. I have to do that. In my own mind, I have to take away whatever is remaining of the enslavement policies that are giving me privilege and them not privilege. I have to take that out of my own head. I have to be able to truly be in an equal space with them and with each
Right.
person, and that's the ongoing task to do, isn't it?
Mhm.
And encourage people around me to do it. So you guys. Thank you for your time today. All right, bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jim. Great class. Thank you.